Welcome to the Divorcing Religion YouTube channel, where you'll find episodes of the Divorcing Religion podcast, the Conference on Religious Trauma, and the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference. Don't miss my interviews with great guests like Seth Andrews, Dr. Daryl Ray, and author Margaret Atwood, talking about religion and religious trauma syndrome. Become a member for more benefits, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss new content. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. You might know that the Conference on Religious Trauma is on hiatus this year. And while it is on hiatus, I've been working hard behind the scenes to put together next year's in-person event in Seattle in 2025. I'm hosting the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture live event. And if that piques your interest, you are going to love my guest today. She is a trailblazer in the realm of sex therapy. Michelle Fischler is a certified sex therapist and supervisor with the Association of Sex Therapy in Ontario, Canada. Since earning her Master of Social Work degree from the University of Toronto in 2009, Michelle has dedicated herself to making a real difference in the world of sex and relationship therapy. In 2022, Michelle launched the GETSOME podcast to tackle the often taboo topic of sexuality. She recognized that sexual shame can deeply affect mental and emotional well-being, so she created a platform where open and honest conversations about sex could thrive. Continuing her mission, Michelle released her first sex education module and workbook, Unlearning Sexual Shame, in 2024. This resource aims to empower individuals to embrace a healthy, shame-free view of their sexuality. Michelle's unique approach combines engaging curiosity, a playful sense of humor, and deep empathy. She's passionate about making sex education accessible and impactful. Through her work in advocacy and community engagement, Michelle Fischler is creating a positive shift in how we talk about and understand sexuality, one conversation at a time. Welcome, Michelle.
Oh, thanks, Janice. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited about this conversation and see whose lives that it could change. Who's listening?
That's right. That's right. And I just love the name of your show, Get Some. I just think that is beautiful. That really is so, it's so cheeky, but it's also straightforward. You know, people who are tuning in to Get Some, they have an idea what it's probably going to be about.
Yeah, it's actually really funny if I have to do any work where that involves calling a bank or a credit card or whatever, and they ask me what the name of my company is, and I say Get Some. I'll usually say Get Some Inc. because there's always a bit of a pause. I don't know if it's a giggle or like them just all, but they seem to go with it. But I always have a bit of a smile.
Oh, that is good. I know when I'm telling people, I'm always a tiny bit hesitant when they say, what's the name of my business and my show? And I say, well, Divorcing Religion, because everybody, well, no, I won't say everybody. Many people understand about sex and our biological drive towards sex, although not everybody feels that. But religion is something that is, somewhat different, and people have really strong feelings for sure about it. And there's so much crossover between religion and shame and sexuality and sexual shame. So I'm just tickled to have you here today. Yeah. Would you tell us a little bit about your own background and growing up? I don't know if religion was anything that ever came across in your household or not.
Yeah. Well, I grew up as the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and the impact that had on him was feeling very unsafe around an identity with religion. And so his family was killed in the Holocaust. And so he was the only survivor. And a lot of his connection to being Jewish was something that was to be kept a secret. And that was how we were raised. My mother is Catholic, and my brother and I were not raised religious. It was more about assimilating to society because that was something that felt very safe. So yeah, we had Christmas and Santa Claus would show up, who was my dad. And funny enough, he was somebody that really embraced Santa, and he seemed to love going to midnight mass.
Okay.
But when we ended up by moving to South Africa when I was about 5 years old to live in this resort called Sun City because my dad was in the hotel industry.
Okay.
And it was during apartheid. And so all the white kids whose parents were working at the resort had to get shuttled off to a convent for education.
Wow.
So I mean, it was pretty interesting because Sun City was known to be like, it was very hedonistic, very sexy, lots of showgirls, lots of like topless showgirls. So there was a lot of sexuality that was being exuded there. And then I would end up in the convent, and it was completely the opposite. And so I felt like it was a little bit, I mean, I don't know if I really noticed it at first, but while I was there, boys and girls were split up. We were at a certain age. We were taught how to put our bathing suits on because there was a pool there, how to put our bathing suits on without exposing any of our body. And so there was these like little messages, and it was it was a moment that I remember forever, but it was when I was playing with a friend of mine. We were waiting for the bus to come, the shuttle bus, and it was really hot. So we were like, oh, let's just get into our bathing suits and have a water fight because there was a hose.
Yeah.
So him and I were running around in our bathing suits, and then all of a sudden, these like nuns come walking out, and we got in a lot of trouble. You know what? And it was direct. Well, I don't know what they said to him, but we were separated. And to me, it was, what are you thinking? You can't be half naked in front of another boy. And there was something about it. Like it was confusing to me. I didn't really know what it meant. But with time, and as I continued getting messages through my education there, I started to feel really uncomfortable about my body, and about being in a bathing suit. And these were just things like I used to live in a bathing suit. So I became it was almost like the messages I was getting was almost sexualizing me, but I didn't understand it. And I just knew that it made me feel gross inside.
Wow. And so how old do you think you were when that incident happened with the water fight and the little friend?
It must have been between like 5 and 6 years old. So I was
so innocent.
Very innocent. And funny things happened at the convent. Like every morning we would have to have underwear checkers. So, because we had to wear uniforms. And so somebody would have to go under our skirts to make sure we're wearing the matching underwear. And if we weren't, we would get into a lot of trouble. Like it was still corporal punishment. So we would get slapped with a ruler behind the legs or on the hand. Like it was a very, very terrible time. I used to like throw up before I was going to school every day. And I was there for 2 years, but it definitely had an impact on me.
Wow, that is just so incredible to think of the two differences in the environment there. The one where it's
Yeah.
kind of like very anything goes, and everyone's having a great time, and then the other one where
Yeah.
it's absolutely shameful to
Yeah.
expose any part of your
I
body.
wanted to be a showgirl. Like I
Oh,
was, I was like wanting
because
to
they were
be
so
a
beautiful.
showgirl because they were so beautiful and glamorous. And then, my parents thought it was funny. Um, and then they would continue the joke, but as the shame started to set in for me, like it wasn't funny anymore. It was more embarrassing that I would have wanted to do that.
Mhm.
So, that's where I would say, and I was young, but it really impacted me in a very maybe subconscious, unconscious way uh, into my adulthood.
Yeah, and let's just make it plain that anybody who's talking about doing underwear checks, there is a problem there. There's an issue there. That's not something that would be considered normal or acceptable, certainly in Canadian schools, hopefully not anywhere else
And
either.
the
That should be a huge red flag.
yeah, and there was obviously two headmasters that were men, right? So
Mhm.
there's the two men, and then there's all the nuns, right? And was there,
Oops.
there was love some lovely nuns, one very mean one, but some lovely nuns. But these two headmasters were scary.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's where it began for me. I would say that is where the shame seed got planted.
Oh, totally. And I can just, as you were describing it, almost feel like it coming over you like a shroud.
Yeah,
It's not something that you sought out or you wanted in any way. And in fact, they were taking something that was just sweet and innocent and
yeah,
normal and healthy
yeah,
and really twisting it to
yeah,
make it like to really sexualize
yeah.
aspects of you that's not what you were about. That's not that what was going on.
Yeah, this it was almost like being objectified in
Yeah.
some ways. I
Hmm.
I just knew that I felt very uncomfortable in my bathing suit, in anything that was showing too much skin, um, because I didn't trust what other people were thinking about my intentions.
Wow. Wow. And
Yeah.
that sounds so much related to purity culture that has really come to the forefront,
Mm,
unfortunately, through evangelical circles. And
mm,
the idea that boys always have to be guarding against impure thoughts about girls, but with girls, it's their body that's impure. It's their body that's the
yes.
problem. And that is
Yeah.
so toxic to internalize those messages.
Yeah. And if no one is telling you something else, right, to contradict those messages, you just sort of believe it as is.
Wow. So then what
Yeah.
was that like? You left that school,
Yes.
thankfully. But then,
Mm,
nature takes its course.
yeah.
You enter into adolescence and
Hmm.
just everything that's going on that's so kind of regular, all the hormone storms, body changing,
Yeah.
curiosities, embarrassment, all these different
Yeah.
things. It's really tough to be an adolescent, to
Oh, it's
be
horrible.
and yeah, you
Yes.
just don't
Yes.
have any say or control over what your body is doing. It's just going to
No.
happen.
Yeah.
And that can be such a difficult time. What was it
Hmm.
like for you, adolescence?
Yeah. I think it was not great. I think adding shame on top of puberty and your body changing is the feeling that experience of what that feels like. I can still remember it. You couldn't pay me $1 million to go back to that day, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Now, I also think that sex wasn't, I mean, it was funny because my dad would joke about sex. My mom was embarrassed about his jokes. So I don't really? I mean, I didn't know what the hell, what to
Yeah.
believe, right?
Yeah.
I was like, what is it? There was just, it was so opposite. Um, but thankfully, I was able to take the humor that my dad gave me that was connected to sex, which I think actually really works really well in my practice now. But yeah, being younger, I was afraid. I was afraid of boys. I was afraid of sex. I was, um, yeah, like even being alone with a boy or holding hands, like there was something about it that made me extremely nervous. And then I don't know, I think I was 16 and I got my first boyfriend, and there was something that did change at that point where I was like, now it was also around a similar time where Sue Johansson came out, who was in Canada anyways, and she did end up by getting into the US. But we got our sex education from her, and she was amazing. She was a nurse who talked very matter-of-factly about sex, and it was on television and the radio. And it was hilarious because she would have callers come in, and she was just, they would say just the most hilarious questions.
Hmm.
And we're all, the next day at school, we're like, oh my God, did you listen to Sue? And I truly believe that she really helped to somehow intercept my sexual development, because she helped me get curious, right? Here's
Wonderful.
one person who can think about it in one way, and then there's me.
Hmm.
And so I became, I mean, uh, really interested in the work that she was doing, and I loved it. It made me happy. I wasn't having sex when she first came out with the show, but I was like, I'll take you to birth control clinic with my friends.
Nice.
It became fun for me. And then when it was time for me to have sex, I was so excited about it. I was like, oh my God. And I could have, honestly, once I did have sex, I could have just put up a sign and be like, I did it. And it wasn't horrible. I mean, everybody's first time, what it seems like from when I ask people in my practice, um, their first time is often uneventful.
Hmm.
Never what anybody tells you
Of
it's going
course.
to be like. It's, not
It's
that
not like the movies portray it.
No, no. And I certainly know that now in my private practice, because I work with people and I ask them those questions, like, what was your first experience like with sex? And so from 16 and up, I started to get a healthier experience with sex. Then I decided, well, if Sue can do something like this career, I want to do something like this. And of course, my mom is just like, what do you mean you want to be a sex therapist? My dad was tickled pink. He thought it was hilarious. And I really, that was all I ever wanted to do. But even then, like as you get into your teens and you're having more sexual experiences, I, I, the sex is different in that it feels more performative,
Mhm.
right? It's like, okay, I'm supposed to do this thing. It was less about my pleasure and more about putting on a good show.
Mm.
And I think that learning about the pleasure piece came later.
Sure.
When it came later for me. I'm still, you can't help it. The shame seed is in our brain,
Yeah.
and we can choose to starve it. Like if we imagine it to be a weed, we can
Mhm.
starve it by not putting water on. But if we aren't paying attention, it can just take over, right? And some of these messages that we've heard growing up, like, you know, enjoying sex, what does that mean, right? You kind of have to always tell yourself, okay, that's not fact, Michelle. It's not bad to do these things. You're not a slut. You're not this. You're not that. Right. This
Right.
is
And
about
it's the different
pleasure.
messages that females receive, as opposed to boys and men. We,
Yeah.
especially if we grow up in religious families, but even otherwise in general in culture, if
Yeah.
if a woman has multiple partners, she's the one that's called a slut or referred to in some derogatory way, rather than
Yeah.
someone who's in charge of their own sexuality and knows what they
Yeah.
want and knows what they like, and it's
Yeah.
comfortable giving and receiving.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It's also very difficult for younger women who did grow up in, let's say, purity culture or wherever there was shame infused, and they are maybe in a relationship where they're the ones with the higher sex drive
Hmm.
and their partner doesn't want to have sex with them, who, let's
Hmm.
say, is a man. They feel like there's something wrong with them, right? Are they hypersexual? Even sometimes they get that criticism from their partner. Well, why are you so horny all the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, they're feeling badly about their
Hmm.
sexuality, but you're screwed if you either way,
Yeah.
right? Either you're too sexual, you're not sexual enough. It's hard to find that middle ground.
Right. And so that's where um, accurate sex information can be really helpful, rather than just kind of
Yeah,
going into things blind, not really knowing.
yeah,
We can't really rely on social media. I would like all
no,
young people, especially,
yeah,
to know that. I mean, there are some accurate people and information on social media who really
yeah,
are trying to do you a service, but there are a lot of people who are heavily indoctrinated
yeah,
with toxic messaging, and they don't even know that it's toxic and inaccurate. So we really
yeah,
need to be careful where we're getting our information from.
yes.
Did your mom know that you enjoyed listening to Sue Johansson?
Mhm.
Did your mom talk with you about sex, or was it like, oh, thank God, I don't have to do that because Sue Johansson is talking to my kid about sex?
Yeah. Yes, my mom did know that I listened to Sue, and she kind of would always giggle. No, my mom did not talk to me about sex at all. It was a very like, my dad, as I said before, made jokes about like sex. But again, it was not about, hey, Michelle, these are things that are going to happen to your body. Totally fine, healthy. No, I had to figure it out on my own and through Sue.
Hmm. And I mean,
Yeah.
I gotta say, sex is hilarious. Like, I think sex is really, really, it's just such a
Look, you either
funny
laugh or you
thing.
cry about it, given today's situation,
Yeah, and I mean, the
right?
older I get, with every year, it seems I become more and more relaxed about it. But it's very different
Yeah.
now than when I was raised, and that was in the 70s and 80s. And
Yeah.
certainly, the attitude was you're to keep your legs closed.
Mhm.
Just don't even bother. Wait till you're married. That's kind of what it was in my house.
And so I'm going to just flip this for a second, but
Sure.
in your house, when you were given those messages and then you
Hmm.
eventually did get married,
Hmm.
did you, what was it? Were you able to experience pleasure? Was there conflict around enjoying certain
Yeah,
things?
right. Yeah, I'm consider myself super fortunate because
Yeah.
so I grew up in a religious home,
Hmm.
but my last couple of years in my teens, like 18, 19, 20, that sort of thing, I managed to break free from religion for a few years as best I could. I
Right.
started singing in a rock band. Like, I really pursued worldly, wonderful, secular
Yeah.
things, and sex was one of those
Mhm.
things. And so by the time I did get married, of course, by then I was religious again, but I
Yeah.
already knew kind of what I liked when it came to sex, and I knew
Yeah.
what was required for me in order to enjoy it. And I married someone
Mm.
who was had not been sexually active before we got married. And so I was able to kind of mold or show my ex-husband what I liked and what worked for me. And so that I felt like we had a pretty good relationship throughout our marriage. So that was really good in the sexual way. But when I was raising my daughters then, and I was super religious by then, like picture me wearing a head covering and all these different things, like very, very conservative. And so the messaging that my daughters got when they were little was definitely that sex is only for marriage and you shouldn't be looking for it elsewhere. Of course, when I rejected all religion, my kids were about in their early teens to mid-teens. And at that same time, I was like, you know what? Everything I told you before, you can just freaking forget it. I'm putting everybody on birth control. Like, I don't.
Oh my God. They're like, yeah, Mom. Did they accept that, or was there any?
Well, their dad wasn't very keen on it because our deconstruction didn't happen on the same timeline.
Oh, okay.
And my response was, well, I mean, the kids, teens do have sex. They just do. Do you want to be a grandparent, at this point in your life? I want the kids to be able to enjoy sex when even they're not having sex now, but when they do, I want them to enjoy it and not have to worry about this. So I think I was very liberal then when I did flip that switch. So that was good.
As a sex therapist, my proudest moment was when, this actually moments, I should say, because it happened with both of my kids. They would come home. It was at the point where sex was becoming funny for kids, right? Like everyone would giggle when they heard the word sex. And so they would come home and be like, why are people laughing? Like, what is so funny about it? Because in my home, like, I mean, if you look behind me, I have tons of books. My job is a sex therapist. So it's somehow, I guess it's not as exciting to my kids as it might be for others, right?
Right, because it's more matter of fact in your family.
Exactly. Like it's, I'm so proud that I could give my kids a really, really shame-free relationship with their body. And I have two boys. So I was also like, one really important thing when you're in your sex ed class and they say, what's this? And it's a picture of a woman's vulva. I want you to say it's a vulva because I bet you everybody else is going to say vagina.
Right.
So I'm like, come on, you gotta do this one thing for me.
Oh, that is awesome. And I think it's such a beautiful, it's wonderful to have sons and be a mother and be like teaching them how to treat partners, how to treat, whether their partner is male or female, just the whole,
or like non-binary, queer. Like I get to choose books where there was barely any before, and now there's all of these really neat books that talk about your body and gender and sexuality on a spectrum, which I'm always so curious about how. I mean, we can't see it right now with what's going on in the States and, around sex. And I can't even say sex on Instagram. Otherwise I get shadow banned. But I do believe when I have clients coming into my office, that they think about relationships a bit different, right? They're less confined. I'm not saying that there isn't shame, because usually everybody that comes in to see me is struggling with some kind of sexual shame, whether that be through religion, through culture, through like sexual abuse, sexual trauma. But there seems to be less of a binary way of thinking about it, which is nice.
Yeah, boy, oh boy, things have changed so much. I'm going to say in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
My husband and I went to our local town's Pride event
Mm,
this year, which was just delightful. And it
mm,
grows every year.
mm.
And one of the booths that we stopped in at was put on by UBC Okanagan. And
Yeah.
it was like a game. You would spin a wheel, and then there was a question. And one of the things was there were all these different flags. You know, we're used to the rainbow flag and
Yeah.
the trans flag.
Yeah.
All these different flags, way more than I was aware of.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to say which one you think
Oh
is
my
for what.
gosh.
It
Yes.
was amazing. I
That
mean,
was so fun.
yeah, that definitely showed me, boy, I need to keep up with my learning. But I love that
Yeah.
young people today have so many more options. I think the topic of sex, at least in
Yeah.
Canada, it's far less secretive than
Yeah.
it used to be. And kids don't
Mm,
even bat an eye today if someone has two dads or two moms, or I mean, kids are declaring fairly early on, that they
mm.
think they're uh, asexual or
Yeah.
bisexual or whatever it is. And so, of course, we, let kids know that it's a time of exploration. You're
Yeah.
learning about yourself. You may try on and off many different
Mm-hmm.
identities. And so we don't have to box ourselves in, and we don't even have to make pronouncements like that. But
Yeah.
it's okay if we do something and then we're like, oh, that's actually not me. That's not for me. And then we can go
Exactly.
on and try something else. And I
And
love that freedom.
that freedom, it doesn't just happen in young people. Like it change in sexuality is so fluid,
Yes.
um, all the way up into your 60s, 70s, and 80s, because sex does change during that time too, because maybe how you had sex before isn't quite working for you
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
And you need to approach it a little bit different. Or maybe you want to try things that you've always wanted to try, but maybe you were married before, or I don't know. Like
Yeah,
it
it's
was, you didn't even think about it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want to try that. And
yes.
so it's so lovely um, when I see people and they've lived a fairly monogamous life, um, and are at a point in their life where maybe they want to explore what it's like to be with somebody that's
Hmm.
not the partner that they've been with for the last
Hmm.
25 years. I'm not
Hmm.
saying that they're going to. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the idea that they're giving themselves permission to even think about it, to think
Hmm.
about, am I straight? Or
Was I just conditioned that way? Yeah.
exactly. And
Hmm.
that work is really, really, I love it. I love helping people just be curious about themselves and without shame, and even if necessary, like how do you communicate that to the people that it could impact?
Right. Yeah. Of course, when we've been in a relationship for a long time and we've only known or experienced the relationship to be one way, it can
Yeah.
be a massive paradigm shift and take lots of counseling with someone like you, a sex
Yeah.
therapist,
Yeah.
to talk about these different things. And of course, what we
Mm,
really need is a platform of safety, feeling
yeah.
safe. And that can be
Yeah.
really difficult if we're mired in shame, if we're
Oh yeah.
dragging this shame around all the time. But you have
Yeah.
to be get to such a point that you're even willing to explore that
It
shame.
it takes enormous amount of trust for my clients to work with me.
Hmm.
Because when you're doing this kind of work, your clients need to have a trust that you kind of know what you're talking about, right? Because they've been
Hmm.
taught things before that weren't true and that
Hmm.
were quite harmful to them
Right.
in their belief systems. And so depending on, if they were brought up in different religious backgrounds. And so it's about trust. It's about like slowly getting into things and slowly building that trust and just providing so much validation mixed with psychoeducation, because a lot of people think that these beliefs that they have are facts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite shocking, quite upsetting when they realize that they're just interpretations.
Yes, yes, that's so true. And the idea that whoever, if you picture shame as a bag and someone's like giving it to you and they're saying, here, take this, you can actually say, no, thanks. Like, that's your bag. That doesn't have to be my bag. And that's what shame is like. And to stop and explore the messaging that we received around something and say, well, wait a minute, is that actually true? Or was it just the person, the older person oftentimes, who introduced me to this concept and said that it was shameful? Does it have to be shameful for me?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I talk with people about when those beliefs started, the shameful beliefs, it's typically when they're really young. And there's typically a kind of shaming person, right? And usually it's somebody who you respect, trust,
like an elder, right?
So when you have this person telling you those things, of course you're going to think it's true. And it's also risky if you don't, because that's your community, right? You want to be accepted. You kind of go with it, right? And so when that feels like a fact, a whole narrative around their sexuality is very much connected to that way of viewing the world. And so supporting people to think about it in a different way. And, I do a lot of this. I do a lot of narrative therapy, where it is going back, looking at your story, seeing how it's not quite serving you, and where did it come from, right? Where did you get that information? Who were those people? Were they the people that you want to learn about your sexuality from? Right.
Yeah.
And it's to watch people go through those changes of just thinking about themselves in a different way. It's life-changing. It's painful. It's scary. It's life-changing, right? And it's really about sometimes getting comfortable with some of that discomfort.
Yes.
Right? Because there's a lot of fear around changing how you think about things that you've thought that way about for 30 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's my whole business with people divorcing religion, and particularly if they were raised in it and steeped in it from the time they were born or for many years. That kind of paradigm shift can be really scary, and it's often unwelcome. Like, I didn't set out to lose my faith. I was horrified. I never would have imagined that I would have been not being a deeply devout believer. Now, all these years down the road, I'm like, wow, I love the life that I have now. I'm so free. I don't have any worries about hell or being judged or, anything like that. And that is such a liberating thing. And you mentioned a couple words that I think are really worth stopping on. One being the idea of truth. Is that concept true that was taught to me, or that I ingested? And then the other being curiosity. Can we swap out judgment for curiosity? Because that feels like a massive, wonderful key going into a lock to unlock a beautiful, exciting, enriching life, where we can give ourselves permission to try anything, as long as it's not against the law, as long as it's not hurting another person. We can try it. That's so beautiful.
It can be gentle. It doesn't mean that you need to just make a change all of a sudden. It's just being curious, thinking about it in a different way. But I also do work on, and what would you be afraid of? Like, what keeps you from wanting to be curious? What keeps you from wanting to change? And what would you need in order to allow yourself, give yourself permission to maybe think or do things that are a little bit different than you have before? And it's it's very hard for people to even imagine being in that place where they could feel just like they were enough, right? What they want is okay. Who they are is okay. But the goal is that that's really what they want, right? They want to just be able to feel better about themselves. They want to be able to, I don't know, have fun with when it comes to sex. And when people come to me, and I don't know if this is the same for you, but people who come to uh, my office to talk about sex, number one, it's the most vulnerable conversation to
Mm-hmm.
have. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and therapy in general, I think is kind of nerve-wracking for people because they're
Yes.
like, what am I gonna get here? What's gonna
Yeah.
happen? But so people, I sometimes see people who have never had therapy before, but they're coming in for sex therapy. There is a certain type of person that ends up in my office.
Mm.
And often these are people who already know curiosity. They know that something isn't quite right. They know that they're feeling bad about something, but they can't like connect it. It doesn't make sense to them. They feel often that they're broken.
Mm.
And so, what I find with the work that I do is helping people doing that narrative work, but helping them make sense of how they got here.
Mm-hmm.
Because many people feel like they for some reason weren't given a roadmap to the kind of relationship and sex that other people seem to do
Mm-hmm.
fine, but
Mm-hmm.
they can't seem to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people that I get end up by being quite a lot of them are actually quite funny. Um, very, very lovely, kind, bright people. Also people who to talk about sex is a privilege in that when you don't have a place to live, when you're struggling with finances, when you've got like illness, sex is not something you're thinking about. You're just like trying to get by.
Mm-hmm.
So it brings in a different kind of population where they're like, okay, I'm sort of at this place where things are okay, but I want things to like, I actually want to
Right.
I want to have some fun, right? I
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to like just own who I am. So there's something happening for them. And so the work is I feel so privileged to do this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, boy, that's true. And when I think of people who are either coming out of very, very strict religious backgrounds, or in
Mm,
some places the religion is also deeply tied in with the culture, and
yeah.
sex is considered secret and
Yes.
shameful, and
Hmm.
it's really, oh my gosh, it can be so challenging then to be
Yeah.
living in North American society. And I'm thinking of, say you're in a big city like Toronto or Montreal or
Yeah.
Vancouver or something, and sex is there, sex is available, sex is, kind
Yeah.
of, it can be kind of almost right in front of you. There's
Yeah.
shops selling different things. Um,
Yeah.
and if you were raised to be scared around sex, and
Yeah.
the idea of anyone finding out that you might be a sexual being, well, of course, we're all sexual beings, like there's no getting away from it.
Yeah.
Um, then that can be really, really difficult. And so I can
Yeah.
imagine people coming in to see you
Mhm.
specifically to talk about it when they've been taught that it's not something to talk about.
Yeah. Because I've done this work for about 10 years, where I've had my private practice, and I just never know what I'm going to get with clients. And
Mhm.
what I have learned about culture, belief systems, race, all of those things has been uh, gosh, so eye-opening. And what if you look at sex therapists in Ontario, most of us are white. It's a very, it's an expensive training to do. You have to go do your master's, like and so I will often get people coming in who are not like sometimes it's biracial, different cultures, backgrounds than myself, but like I'm kind of they're slim pickings. Right? And so for me though, it has been it has added a whole layer to Western sexuality where I've been learning, and I want to learn so much more so that when my clients do come in, that first of all, I name it. I'm like, how are you feeling coming in to see me, given the fact that I am white here? Like, can we talk about that right now? Let's just name it. And then what can I do to help make this space feel safe enough for you? And it's funny, every time I bring that up, especially with my clients, they're like, I'm really happy you brought that up. I see it. Like, I've never had someone bring that up to me before.
Right.
You know, it was something that I was taught about. But going back to religion, one thing that, and it's a bit of a phenomenon in my practice, is not newly married, people who have been married for maybe 3 years at this point. Maybe they have Christian backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, Orthodox Jewish backgrounds. And they've not had sex or had penetrative sex yet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. They weren't given any information around what sex is going to be like on their night of on their honeymoon, and sometimes it doesn't go very well, and sometimes it can be quite painful, and sometimes people end up by avoiding it altogether. And so people come into my office when they get to the point where their parents are saying, hey, like, where are the kids? Right, where are the kids? And they're like, okay, well, I guess we need to get some help here. And so it's been rewarding work, trying to get them to still be connected with their community if that's what they want, right? While also being taught about sex, like getting some of that sex education that they didn't get, and then talking about like, what happened, like what's your sex life been like? Because often when there's been pain, there's been fear, disappointment around sex, it just gets as they keep trying, it gets they start to already get anxious even before they're going to have sex. And so it's about how to like undoing it. Right. Undoing it and then starting on a fresh new foundation. And what I've learned is that you can give people tips and tricks and techniques up the woo-ha or whatever you want to call it. But if they are feeling shame around sex and who they are as a sexual being, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So a lot of people are like, we just want to have sex so that we can have a baby. And I'm like, okay, well, we need to, I will usually tell people sex therapy is not great to do, number one, when you're pregnant. Number two, it's not, meaning that, our bodies are going through so many changes when we're pregnant that it's like hard to predict how you're going to feel about things from one week to the other. But also when the goal becomes having a baby, any sex that becomes goal oriented is just like, you've just already killed it. Like there's pressure, right? So we have conversations around, okay, look, you want to have a baby. Do you really need to get pregnant in the through penetrative sex? Because there are ways that we can try to work on your relationship with sex, take the pressure off of, getting pregnant. We could maybe give that job off to like fertility clinic or some other little tips or tricks. But let's work on your relationship with sex, and let's start with just some touch, right? Learning to take the anxiety out of it, get out of your head, learn how to get into your body. And so it takes a while, this work, but I often get emails with people sending me baby pictures and just where people are like, "Oh my God, I didn't even know sex could be like this." Or I was trying to put my penis in the wrong hole.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just so grateful that they had a space to talk about this.
Right. Yeah. Where they wouldn't be judged for not knowing, because of course we have to be taught things. It's nobody's born knowing all the stuff, and then sometimes we've received wrong, misleading, and inaccurate information. That's not our fault. That's the information that we received. So being able to talk to someone like you, who's very welcoming and warm and non-judgmental. That just would go such a long way. I'm wondering about the course that you've recently developed about unlearning sexual shame and overcoming it.
Yeah. Through the years, as I said before, I find that you cannot skip the shame piece. And so I started to look at my practice and what it is that I'm doing and working on with my clients that seems to be helpful. And there's 4 different pieces. One is understanding the difference, understanding what shame is, and even understanding what the difference between guilt and shame is, right? Guilt is something that you do that is bad, right? Maybe steal something. Shame is that you think you are bad, right? So first it's about learning about the difference, and then learning about how shame comes up. Where does it come from? Where do we learn it? And then we move on to exploring where some of that shame might be for you. And we do it in a very gentle way. So it's all me. I'm talking like I am to you right now. There's times where there's prompts, and they have I have a little workbook that they work on as well. But then it becomes more reflecting on your story. And obviously, this is a self-guided module. However, not everybody is going to be the best candidate for it, right? This is going to be for people who have some coping strategies, who are curious, and who can tolerate conversations around sex without getting overly anxious. Some anxiety is fine. Some discomfort is fine. But for people who are really, really struggling, because there's a lot of people that struggle out there with anxiety around sex, going to see somebody who's trained in the area of sex is going to be helpful. And this module can be worked on during the work with their therapist. So it's just an opportunity. It's it's homework that people can go with, and they can, do one session per week, and it brings up lots of questions, and it adds to the therapy that they're doing in the session. And so then it goes on to, you explore where your own shame is. And then mindfulness is the third lesson, which I can't do this work without mindfulness. It is impossible to have good, pleasurable sex without being mindful. And mindfulness, what that is getting out of your head and into your body, right? In order for our bodies to start experiencing pleasure, we need to be paying attention to sensations like texture, pressure,
Mm-hmm.
temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And mindfulness is like a skill that it's like a muscle in your brain, kind of like going to the gym. It gets stronger and stronger. The more you do it, the more you learn about it, the more that you implement it. It's not
Okay.
that you have to like be doing an hour mindfulness thing every single day. It's about learning what it is. And it not just helps you in sex, but it helps you, I think, in
Mhm.
all facets of your life.
Yes.
But the mindfulness is helpful because that also teaches people to let go of the story, let go of the
Oh.
narrative, because maybe they're doing something, they feel all of a sudden that shame comes over them.
Mm. Mm.
Once they notice it, that's the most important part. Notice it. I want you to take a deep breath and I want you to start focusing on the texture, the pressure, and temperature that you're feeling. And this can be done either on your own, and it can be with self-pleasure, masturbation, or you can
Mm-hmm.
just do it like non-sexually at first. And then it's something that I introduce with my clients and couples. But so we do mindfulness. And then the last part is rewriting your narrative. So it's about looking at, okay, where do you want to go? Right? What is your goal with how you want to be when it comes to sex?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to get there? And so it's about holding yourself accountable, taking all the information that if you want to, I don't know, maybe you're single and you want to finally date somebody and get married and have kids. Okay. What is going to be necessary for you to get there? Right. Well, it might be getting through some of that fear of going online dating again, getting yourself out into the world. Right. Or maybe it's like having an orgasm in front of another person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, whatever it is. But it's very much moving towards that goal. And then that's the foundation. Like that's what I do in my practice. And so I just took that and put it into a module, and I'm super proud of it.
Beautiful.
It's really good.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it sounds really good.
Thank you.
Yes. Wow. And I love that you even mentioned their self-pleasure and masturbation. I
Yeah.
feel like that can be a really important starting place for some people is just getting comfortable with their own body, even
Yep.
taking a look, holding a mirror,
I
seeing
know.
what do you actually look like. And
People
this
want
is
to
something
skip
we
it.
should know about. Yeah.
People want to skip it. I always tell people, I'm like, I wish you could skip it. Um, but if you don't know what feels good on your body and what feels good in terms of touch,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be able to tell that to the other person, right? The other
Right.
person needs to know. It's not their responsibility to learn what feels good with your body,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your pleasure, your orgasm is your responsibility.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When
Mm-hmm.
you learn to make one person orgasm, you've only learned to make one person orgasm. It is not a
Mm-hmm.
transferable skill. And so, yeah, and a lot of work goes into, okay, we can't skip this. We
Right.
gotta, and we stay in that spot for a long time. Self-pleasure is very tricky for people because they're left with their own thoughts. And that's why mindfulness is helpful and the one that I have, it's more mindfulness and sexual touch.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than it just being general mindfulness. So it's
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Yes. And um, for a lot of people, fantasy, having an active fantasy life,
Mm,
also very important. I know, especially for
yes.
women, a lot of what's going on in here impacts, whether we're going to be able to relax and
And
have
it's
a really
okay.
pleasurable
You're
experience.
allowed to think about
Absolutely.
whatever you want to think about.
Absolutely. And,
Yes.
I remember with one partner that I had, um, I was really just getting into the zone. Things were moving along. I was feeling really good. And then all of a sudden, they said, tell me your fantasy. And it broke me out of
Oh no.
and I was like,
Oh,
Do
man.
not talk to me.
Zip it.
You just
Zip
left it for me. But how would they know? They wouldn't know because we had never had that conversation. And one thing I'll just recommend before we wrap up here,
Yeah.
I really love the idea of yes, no, maybe lists where people can think about what they do like, what they don't like, what they're willing to try, what they're curious about. Actually, going through a checklist. I know Simon Fraser University, SFU, has some great, a great website around that. So I just encourage people. Also, Scarlet Teen, great,
great.
Yes, no, maybe lists. So hopefully, maybe that's something new for somebody who's listening or watching today, and that's something that they can check out and explore.
And you can start small. Maybe it's just talking about sex, right? Baby steps. I start so small with my clients, as small as that they want to go, and then you just build on it. And communication. If you can't talk about it, if you can't talk about sex, you shouldn't be having it. It is the communication piece is probably the most helpful part of the work that I do with people. It creates intimacy, it creates trust. And yeah, it's great. I love my job.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can tell you love your job. Your clients are really fortunate to have you to talk to. Thank you for making the time to speak with me today. I really hope our paths cross again in the future. I'd love to collaborate, maybe at a conference or something. So thank you. How can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me at getsome.ca, one word, or you can follow me on Instagram at getsome_podcast. And you go on my website, you get access, you can find my podcast, you can find the module. Also, if you have any questions, I have an anonymous sex therapy hotline where you can put in your question and I typically will answer them on Instagram, on Reels. And also, if you have any interest in being on our show on GETSOME, we're just getting ready for season 4. So, and especially I love the topic of shame, religion, culture, all of those things. So if there's anyone listening out there who has a story, we can do it anonymously. We can change your voice. But we want to hear your story because your story is going to help a lot of people out there.
Awesome. Wow. You and I didn't even get to really talk about age. We just touched on it briefly about how our bodies change. I would love to talk with you about that. This has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you. I think Sue Johansson would be proud, by the way.
Love her.
Yes. Oh, thanks everyone for tuning in today. I hope that you enjoyed this show as much as I did. And with my guest, Michelle Fischler. Thanks, Michelle. Take care, everyone.
Hi, everyone.